It makes sense because like we always joke about it. Like when you see Clark like saving somebody from like jumping off a building or falling in an airplane. Feel like it'd be funny if they actually were kind of like true of how that's supposed to go, and he catches them and like all their bones break.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, oops."
Yeah, I commend you for not having a splat drawing when you illustrated Superman catching Lois.
Well, I mean,
yeah, like
Lois never splats. Unlike
exactly.
Spider-Man, Superman's never beefed it on this one. So
Wow.
as far as I know,
That's dark. That got dark.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jmike Folsom.
Hello, everybody. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, well, we are going back in time because early in the history of this show, we did an episode on the science of Superman because at the time we were just kind of digging through DC Universe for all the videos that they had available that would just be good fodder for this show. And the two of us are laymen, and we did an okay job, but we were just trying to interpret what this like pop culture version of science was going to do. But now, we've done 100 episodes at this point. We probably should do it right. And so for that, we are joined once again by Ryan Haupt.
Hey, everybody.
And we also have, for the first time, Ben Tippett.
Oh, hello.
Now, Ben, this episode came up because you wrote a while back a paper called A Unified Theory of Superman's Powers.
Yeah. Like 13 years ago, I wrote a paper called A Unified Theory of Superman's Powers, and I published it on the internet. It's not peer reviewed, but it is notorious. So
Notorious.
Well, I mean, it's a very thorough explanation of it. So I guess like starting question is how did that start? Like where what drove you to do that?
Before we dive in, I will say in the parlance of science communication, this paper is open access in that it is available to anyone with an internet connection. So it's not behind a paywall that you got to pay Elsevier $30 to go read. You just need Ryan North to make sure he leaves the server turned on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's true because it is on the Quant's website, or the which most people know from Dinosaur Comics.
Yeah. So how did it start? This was back in the days before Twitter, when a person could just take all of their stupid ideas and just put them on the internet without a second thought and then just immediately forget about them. So at the time I was on Ryan North's internet message board and his fan board for his webcomic. And I was in graduate school in theoretical physics. I studied black holes and stuff. And I was walking to school and, thinking. And when I arrived, I said, I have this fun idea. So I sent Ryan a little email and I was like, hey, I've got this weird idea that says that we can explain all of Superman's various powers in terms of a single power that is being expressed in a variety of ways. And he said, write it up and I'll put it on the internet. And so I did. And that's how it came about. This is how slow everything was back in the day before social media.
Right, it wasn't just fire off immediately and then hope it's good.
That's right.
Like,
but also, you can you send somebody an email and they say, "Yeah, you should write that up," and then you spend all afternoon doing that instead of working. And then they put it on their web page is what people used to do, and then other people would visit the web page and send links to their friends and stuff.
Do you still write in LaTeX, Ben?
I do on occasion. Right now I teach at a community college in rural British Columbia, and sometimes I will give my students notes in LaTeX. It's the fastest way to get equations on a piece of paper, so. It's
a markup language for formatting scientific papers that is very popular in the more math-heavy disciplines like physics, where you have to put equations into papers, and a feature that other text editors are not great at.
Yeah, when going through this, I was like, as soon as we got to, I believe it was supervision. all of a sudden like equations just start popping up, and I was like, oh, okay. Let's see if I can grok any of this. Yeah, so I looking through this, even though like physics is like super not a thing that I can like really work with that well. Like just the equations are just an area where I'm like, no, can't do it. I did really appreciate reading through this all because it is, one, fascinating, and two, similar to some of my own headcanon. So I'm intrigued by this whole part. And I mean, do you want in your words to sort of like give a summary of like what the basic unified theory is, and then we can kind of talk like bit by bit?
Certainly. Okay, so the basic idea here is Superman has a variety of powers. Super strong, invulnerable, he can fly. In addition to that, he can shoot lasers out of his eyes. He can breathe cold on things. Yeah, that's a pretty good rundown, I think. Anyway, so
he also can do super ventriloquism and super knitting powers. He's demonstrated in the past.
Oh, he has
true. And when his gender was flipped, he had superwomen's intuition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I have no physical explanation for superwomen's intuition.
What about super ventriloquism? I feel like that actually fits.
No, yeah,
that one works actually fairly well here.
Easy peasy.
And the super muscle control of the Golden Age actually fits very well. You even cite it.
So basically, instead of now, in terms of scientific approaches to Superman's powers, usually people bring up very heavy planet, Krypton, etc. And so he has super muscles because he is a different species, one that's much stronger. Anyway, so basically, my hypothesis, I'm using passive voice just now. The hypothesis is that what Superman can do is, to a level almost impossible to fathom, he can change the inertial mass of an object by touching it. Down to the molecular level. But essentially what this means is when Superman picks up a building, he's not picking up a building that weighs several tons, he's picking up a building that weighs as much as a cardboard box. And when he is flying, he is lowering his own mass, and he gets buoyancy effects, and he can push off things and kick off things. His muscles do not weaken, but he's as strong as a regular person, but his capacity to change things' mass allows him to do all of these different things. And like I said with the equations, the mass parameter enters into a whole bunch of different equations when you're talking about heat. Heavy things interact with heat in a slightly different way than lightweight things. So if you change that mass, you'll end up spewing cold or making beams of cold heat come out of your eyes, or they affect vibration, and so he can tune his ears to hear higher or lower frequencies, and that's basically the gist of it. He's only got one power, and it's based on things he can touch.
Yeah, and like I said, that actually like kind of goes with a lot of the headcanon that like I have, and that I feel like a lot of writers, especially in like the 80s and 90s, really pushed, because there was like kind of a movement post-crisis to try to be like, how do his powers work? And it's interesting how this actually maps pretty well to sort of that era. I mean, particularly if you think about the death of Superman era, like the Triangle era for Superman comics, where they introduced Superboy as like Con-El, who had tactile telekinesis, and as an offshoot, like seeing that as an offshoot of Superman's powers, and then his clone Match actually had even more advanced versions of that was able to emulate some of the superpowers that Superboy lacked, like the heat vision that he could apparently
tactile
do
telekinesis. Is that what you're referring to?
Tactile telekinesis, yes, but Match apparently could like do like laser vision by like accelerating photons and things like that. So it sort of is like consistent with this like larger idea of some sort of psychic thing going on, not just strong heavy gravity, yada yada yada. And it's really interesting that the way you articulated it was by way of specifically inertia, as opposed to, I think a lot of people were just like, oh, it's psychic. I
mean, the deal is that Superman doesn't affect his surroundings underfoot the way it should. The classic examples like he catches somebody who's fallen out of a plane. That person has a tremendous amount of downward momentum. And Superman getting in the way of the ground and catching them before the ground, that's fine. But he needs to take all that downward momentum and do something with it.
Otherwise, he's just the ground coming at them from a different direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And force, for example, is the change in momentum divided by the amount of time that interaction takes. So, like Superman, he's man of steel. It's like when Lois Lane falls out of a plane into Superman's arms and doesn't hit the ground, unless Superman like bows his trajectory dramatically to increase the amount of time he's like catching her, it's like she's hitting two metal poles stuck on the side of a building, effectively. And so what we're conjecturing here is that Superman can touch Lois Lane and get rid of her momentum by driving down her mass instead of changing her velocity super fast.
And one thing that might be worth mentioning at this point is, people might be asking, why is Ryan back on the show? And the reason I'm back on the show is that Ben and I are buddies, and this paper had only recently been published in the early days of my own podcast, Science Sort of, and one of my friends had come across it and said, oh, this is hilarious, we should talk about it on the show. We have like two topics on my show. So we had our first topic, which was about something else, and then the second topic we were going to do Ben's paper. And I saw, as we were like literally starting our recording, I saw that Ben had put his old email address at the top of this paper. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so I literally shot him an email and said, hey, Ben, you don't know me, but I do a science podcast, and we were planning on talking about your paper. We're just on Skype. If you want to hop on, like, just send me a friend request. Here's my Skype ID. It was, 2009. I don't know if you remember, Ben. September 2009, I believe.
Yeah.
And there might have been October,
I think early
November.
October, yeah.
Yeah, the paper is dated September 30th, 2009.
Yeah, and he responded right away saying, yeah, sure, sounds good. So I surprised my two fellow co-hosts with, like, when we got to that segment, I was like, okay, and now here to discuss the paper with us is the author, Ben Tippett, and that was, like, episode 9 of our show, and Ben has been on the show ever since because he's just a delightful person, and we've become good friends. And it's so funny that, like, he responded to that email immediately and was willing to hop on Skype with 3 complete strangers to talk about his paper. And I like to think that I've become a better interviewer of scientists talking about their work. So, Ben, a question I would have for you at this point is, when you were working on this paper, how much did you have a sense that, like, Superman's powers had evolved over time? Like, in the earliest Golden Age comics, like, he can't do all of the stuff that you had found yourself having to explain. Like, were you aware of that, or were you kind of just assuming that his powers, as presented in the modern era, were kind of static?
Okay, so this is actually, I mean, I'm showing my ass here a little bit, but I'm not much of a comic book reader. The deal was I never had any disposable income as a little kid, so I just never bought comic books. So my familiarity with Superman comes almost exclusively from watching TV and movies. And this is his canonical power set that I'm dealing with. But, in the early Superman days, it was leaps tall buildings with a single bound. Faster than a locomotive.
No, faster than a speeding bullet.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive, right? Leaps buildings, right? That was his canonical power set.
Yeah, specifically an eighth of a mile was his leap, and then they stated that it was only a bursting shell that could pierce his skin.
Yeah. Since then, some of his canonical powers apparently were modified during the Superman radio show era, when they needed essentially a Superman power to get the writers out of they'd written themselves into a corner, and they're like, oh, Superman can see through walls. Superman's weak against this rock called kryptonite, so now Superman has to go on vacation for 2 weeks.
And it was the Fleischer cartoons that introduced full flight, because they said Superman jumping all the time looks silly in animation.
Although they say that, but the opening sequence of the Fleischer cartoons looks pretty dope. Like when he just jumps a building.
Yeah.
I agree. So moral of the story is that I was, I guess, putting my neck out there. Like, right now, everybody knows that if you make yourself known at all on the internet for any reason, the haters are going to come for you. But I didn't know that back then because it was pre-social media days. And so I kind of dodged a bullet because nobody said, oh yeah, this is entirely wrong because this 7-issue spread from 1998 in Superman whatever says something totally different. Like, I mean, I don't know anything about Superman in terms of canonically what the comics have, how the comics have evolved over the maybe 50 years since the first cartoon came out.
Yeah, because when you and I were growing up, Ben, the John Byrne era of the Man of Steel comics in the mid to late 80s, that was when he introduced that idea of like Superman his skin isn't impenetrable, but he has like a bioelectric field that he somehow generates, and that's what like repels everything from hurting him. So they've tried to come up with some pretty wacky explanations, none of which I think are actually as elegant as the theory you put forth. Yeah, I mean that genuinely. And I think like if you throw in a little bit of like Krypton has higher gravity, so he's also just like he is just a little bit stronger than a human would be, even given his size. Like there was a great moment in I'd never watched all of that Legends of Tomorrow show, but like I thought the concept was cool and I liked all the universe jumping. And at one point, the Lex Luthor from that universe ends up in the Smallville universe with Tom Welling, and Tom Welling's like out chopping wood, and Lex Luthor like pulls out a piece of kryptonite to try to kill him, and it doesn't do anything. And Tom Welling's like, yeah, I actually gave up my powers many years ago so Lois and I could have kids. I haven't had powers in a long time. And Lex like thinks about it for a second and then tries to throw a punch, and then Tom Welling blocks it and then just punches him and knocks him onto the ground. He goes, I'm still stronger than you, Lex. I'm still a big farm dude. It was such a good moment. I was like,
but why, like Superman, like in terms of Superman's powers, why is Clark Kent so jacked?
Like he doesn't.
Kid. Yeah, but he's a farm kid. But even if you're doing manual labor all the time, if a hoe weighs like a feather, and he's like he doesn't need to. He's not breaking any muscle fibers on the regular basis.
You gotta pick your Superman artist when you're making that argument. Like if you go with like a Tim Sale or a Frank Quitely, the way that they draw Clark, he does look like a big barrel chest. He's not Arnold Schwarzenegger of Mr. Universe. He's a big a guy who looks like he does hard work, and the way they draw him frumpy as Clark makes a big dude look more believably not super jacked. But that's my personal preference and theory.
Compare that with like an Ed McGuinness, where he's also huge, but he's huge in like that's specifically like Lou Ferrigno style. Just like, oh man, that's a lot of muscle.
I think also like Ben, with your power, there was this idea at one point that like Superman could morph his face, and that was how he was able to look.
Oh yeah, that was the best one. He can make his like cheeks heavier and they sag down.
But your power explains. I mean, your explanation of a power explains that perfectly, because he could alter the shape of sort of his muscles and face with this,
and the bounciness of his hair.
Yeah, true. Yeah. You're saying the S curl is when his powers are active.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could swell his muscles with the way that you explain it.
Well, the way I explain it would be he would have big muscles because he could make everything, his clothes slightly heavier, Goku-esque, and just like he could just do regular training by making everything around him slightly heavier. By the way,
basis. I'm not an anime guy, and even I caught that reference.
Right. and then, but yeah, his hair would have the S curl when he wasn't using his powers. So as Clark Kent, Daily Planet reporter, he would use his powers to make his hair extra heavy, and so the natural, spring constant of his hair that wants to curl it isn't strong enough to keep it curly, and it would flatten out.
You would think if his hair is curly by Kryptonian standards, and Krypton has heavier gravity, his hair would actually be extremely curly on Earth.
Well, I mean,
yeah, naturally, and that's why it naturally curls out the way it does in such a weird, not normally occurring for humans without some kind of product kind of way, and then he uses his powers to reshape it. I actually wanted to call out this section because I do love the way you wrote it, which is that while it's not clear where Kal-El goes when he's not busy saving the world, I love that there's a presentation here where it's like, we don't know that he's Clark Kent, even though you then go on to explain how like the Clark Kent disguise would work.
and his Kryptonian name, which I don't think is public. I don't think that's public knowledge in the DC universe.
Yeah, writing this paper was actually kind of fun. I was trying to write it in universe, which is strange. As an academic, you want to, when you're writing a paper, refer to all of the other papers written in the in the canon that you are working in. And I don't have to. I've gotten slightly better at this actually when I write fictional papers that take place in fictional universes. But at the time, there are no references in this paper, and so I'm kind of guilty about that. I don't know.
You mentioned Siegel et al.
Yeah, I do. In the introduction, I do mention Siegel and
which I actually think I might have to call you out on too, because if Action Comics was just Siegel and Schuster, it should be Siegel and Schuster, not Siegel et al. You're really erasing Joe Shuster's contribution here.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Wow. This paper published by special arrangement with the Jerry Siegel family.
I mean, to be fair, Jerry Siegel also kind of tried to, so,
Yeah.
Dwelling still on the super disguise part, I do actually really love this idea that, like, yeah, the hair shape could change, the shape of his face can change, and even the shade of his eyes could adjust.
That's true.
I thought that was all like a really elegant way of presenting some of the wackier versions of like the Superman disguise part, because sometimes it's just like no one's really looking, and other times it's like hypnotic glasses, and like this kind of worked as like a nice like balance between all the different takes on that.
At one time, we say he was moving really quickly back and forth, so no one could really see how his face looked.
Yeah.
Well, so that was a John Byrne thing they introduced, where as Superman, he intentionally was trying to be difficult to photograph.
Ah, gotcha.
One question I would have for you two, Case and Jmike, does the fundamental concept of changing inertial mass make sense to you guys, or is that something we need to actually dig into a little bit more and explain exactly what that actually means?
It makes sense because like we always joke about it. Like when you see Clark like saving somebody from like jumping off a building or falling in an airplane, you're like, it'd be funny if they actually were kind of like true of how that's supposed to go, and he catches them and like all their bones break.
Yeah.
And he's oh, oops.
Yeah, I commend you for not having a splat drawing when you illustrated Superman catching Lois.
Well, I mean,
yeah, like
Lois never splats. Unlike
exactly.
Spider-Man, Superman's never beefed it on this one. So as far as I know,
that's dark. That got dark.
Throwing Peter under the bus.
Well, more accurately, throwing Gwen off the bridge.
Yeah, go off the bridge.
Yeah, no, the inertial mass like concept made enough sense to me. Like while I'm not a physicist, I am a comic book nerd, and like the comics that I love the most are the ones that do attempt to have some veneer of science to it. Like I get it. Is what like I'm just not like the equations are things that are always going to be like a little bit further than my classical studies humanities major is going to like push me towards. But like in terms of like the basic idea of like, oh yeah, well, the momentum and shifting it and doing all that mostly made sense to me.
Okay, mathematically, my argument stands. I have no complaints even all these years after about the math in this paper. But one thing is really funny, which is like the idea actually requires an incredible amount of information processing. So, like, for instance, specifically Superman's ability to heat things up with his heat vision. Like, X-ray vision is fine. You just tune all of the mass in your eyeballs in a certain way. But heat vision requires, like, Superman shoots a beam of heat, right? Like, those are lasers in the comics. My mechanism for it is that, and this is right, if you just kind of tune as the gas molecules are hitting your eyes, you can kind of use the mass as the gas molecules bounce off your eyeballs. You can tune their mass to kind of baseball bat the particles to be traveling really fast and heat things up with them. And that's essentially the mechanism, is that your eyes, molecule by molecule, are kind of baseball batting all of these particles in the direction you want. But in order to do that, like the gas hitting your eyes is traveling in random directions and hitting your eyes randomly, which means that Superman needs to be able to distinguish one atom from another as it hits his eyes, so he can say, "Oh yeah, these are the ones that are going in the direction that I want. I'm gonna hit this one." It's ridiculous. Anyway, I guess Superman has another power, which is that he's really, really, really smart and can.
So you're saying Superman's essentially a giant mass controlling computer?
Yes, he is a what's it called? Is it? There's a oh geez, I forget the name of the physicist. There is a thought experiment in thermodynamics called like Maxwell's demon or something like that. It's named after a thermodynamics physicist. I forget which one.
Henry Clark? Oh, no, sorry.
No, well, and essentially the idea is that if you have the capacity to distinguish and interact with things.
James Clerk. I said Henry Clark. James Clerk Maxwell.
Oh, James Clerk Maxwell? Well, maybe, if I'm getting the guy right.
I looked it up for you. I'm here.
Did
I'm here to
I?
help.
I got it right.
Yeah.
Oh, good for me.
1867.
So yeah, it's the Maxwell's demon, I guess.
Violation of the second law of thermodynamics. And you can't violate that one. You'll get pulled over by the thermodynamic police.
So you can take a room full of random gas and sort it so there's a hot area and a cold area, and that's essentially what Superman's doing. But I don't know. It requires a ridiculous amount of control. So Maxwell imagined a tiny little demon, like an atom-sized demon, with a little door that he could open and close based on the atoms that were coming to hit the door.
I love the idea of trying to figure out a way to write an arc of a Superman comic called Maxwell's Demon, where like Clark is somehow Clark's existence on Earth is somehow like screwing up all these physics experiments. That they're
oh yeah,
like the neutrino detectors under the ice sheets or whatever.
If Clark Kent is working this way, the LIGO gravitational wave detectors would be impossible to use. Like LIGO is so sensitive. One source of noise that they have to try to filter out. LIGO, there's one in Hannaford, Washington, I think that's
it's like two giant perpendicular lasers, right?
Yeah. There's like two lasers at a 90-degree angle, and there's two stations. One of them's in Louisiana, and the other's like in Washington. So they're on opposite sides of the country, as far apart in the continental United States as they can be. And they're very, very sensitive to vibration. They can pick up tiny, tiny little vibrations, and that's what they're trying to do. But one thing they have to filter out is like waves hitting the shore of the continent provides vibrations that they can detect and have to filter out of their data stream. So if Clark Kent was always changing his mass as he was Supermaning around and changing the mass of things, that would just be like
skyscrapers and
yeah, it would just be a source of vibrational noise that these sensitive detectors wouldn't be able to like calibrate for. And so they would just, anytime Superman was active, their detector would go crazy, and they'd be like, "What is all this garbage?"
This feels like you're saying that Superman is an accidental example of the Trisolarians from the Three-Body Problem, like purposely.
I haven't read it. Wait, I haven't read it. Hang on, I'm taking my headphones off. Wave at me when I can come back.
Okay. Yeah. So in what way?
Just that our understanding of physics is being messed with is like that's an early thing.
Oh yeah. Like what were they called? The not the phonons. They were called the they sent those little particles that were actually computers to fuck up our our experiments. Yeah.
That's all. So like Superman like passively is
that you waving, Case? I can't tell. Can I come back?
Sorry. Sorry, I immediately was like, this is not a big spoiler. It's just an early thing that it's just like physics are being messed with.
Yes.
Or our understanding of physics is being messed
Ben recommended that series to me, and I've started the first book a couple of times now, and it hasn't grabbed me enough to keep going with it, but I know that once I get into it, I'll be super into it, and so thank you for your recommendation, Ben. I'm sorry I haven't got there yet.
It's okay. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I didn't write it. I mean, I wrote this paper like 13 years ago, and you keep bringing me on radio shows and podcasts to talk about it. So I have no complaints about you, Ryan Haupt.
I feel like the idea that Superman is messing up science experiments brings up, the fact that like, I think I wrote an article for iFanboy about how like there are many superheroes where if they actually use their powers to help the scientific research enterprise, I think would actually do more societal good than like stopping a bank robbery.
I can get behind that basic idea. I love the idea of Superman, man of science. Like we've talked about that on the show a lot, where a thing I loved about the animated series was like, oh, we've got like little bits of Kryptonian technology. Let's learn about it together with Professor Hamilton and kind of go from there.
Oh, actually, apparently I only wrote the article about Clark Kent, and here's other jobs Clark Kent could have had.
You know what? I'm going to disagree with you, Ryan.
Okay.
And here's my argument. We know that superheroes don't want to disturb the status quo. Superman more than anybody else. He'll use his journalism to do good journalism and create positive change that way. But Superman isn't in the business of assassinating or endorsing politicians, right?
Not now.
He's not going to use his powers to change things dramatically, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, if Superman is just spent all of his time letting scientists unlock the keys to his powers, that would have unforeseeable repercussions.
I don't know, actually, but the argument I made, Ben, wasn't that he should just let scientists study him. I was saying that, like, Clark Kent should have been a marine biologist because he can, like, go into the Marianas Trench and just look around.
Oh, okay.
And tell us what he sees.
Yeah, why not?
With his perfect memory and, like, draw a nice picture of it. And so, like,
Yeah.
that was my argument, was that, like, I was actually suggesting that Superman or Clark do science, not just be studied.
Oh, I agree with you then. Sure. Yeah.
Because I think
Yeah, but I don't think either are necessarily bad ideas. I mean, like, the status quo element, being purely keeping the status quo, I think is a byproduct of trying to keep this comic going. I mean, the original Siegel and Schuster stuff had a much more, like, revolutionary type character who was trying to make those changes.
Oh, I mean, my number one pick for Clark as another job was as a community organizer, because this was in the Grant Morrison boots and jeans era of the comics. So
yeah, because he could be everywhere. He could just hop in for the next rally or whatever he was doing.
Sure. I mean, I don't disagree. But yeah, I mean, like, science is... The consequences of science aren't necessarily good or evil, but they're not necessarily good. So if Superman let people just study his powers all the time, that might be a real bad thing. They might make a Superman bomb that, like, uses Superman's powers to blow things up. He doesn't know.
Well, didn't Zach Wienersmith do that Saturday Morning Breakfast cereal comic where it's like the best use of Superman's powers is for him to run on a treadmill and turn a turbine and power the world?
Yeah,
like, literally
reason,
just
right?
generate
like
energy.
That would just provide fewer people with the capacity to fuck us over big time.
But it's
Superman doesn't want to do that.
But it's carbon neutral.
Yeah, no, I mean, it would... Yeah, there's a variety of things that Superman could do to alleviate global warming.
I guess we don't know that Superman's carbon neutral.
But yeah, I mean,
That's true.
Superman doesn't want to do anything to the current political apparatus.
Well, he doesn't want to accidentally do anything to the current political apparatus.
Yeah,
like,
and so if he, for instance, gave everybody free power, you could argue, yeah, now the world has the capacity to everybody has free energy and nobody's going to go hungry. The current political apparatus isn't interested in making people not go hungry.
So you're saying Superman is not going to help us attain a post-scarcity utopia like Star Trek presents?
I'm saying that until we earn it ourselves, Superman's not going to do that for us.
Man, Superman makes us work too hard. Help us out.
Yeah, man.
I mean, it's interesting that we're saying this because one character I've wanted to reference in this whole conversation is Miracle Man, or Marvel Man, the Alan Moore revision of the character, then followed up by Neil Gaiman, which we're finally getting the rest of Neil Gaiman's run soon. Was just announced this week when we're recording, I mean. But in that, there is actually the power system works very similarly to how you've written here, where it is a force field around him that he is apparently through being engineered to have a super intellect, able to manipulate in such a way to allow him to fly and do stuff. And the characters who are more advanced with their powers are able to do additional effects that you could infer from your paper, basically, like able to accelerate electrons and so forth to generate electricity and other kind of effects that are going on with it all. But one of the key things that happens is that ultimately the character does take over the world and then creates a golden age for humanity, and then the book shifts gears to wrestling with what the implications for mankind are in that scenario. And
I think about Watchmen a lot, a comic that barely warrants any discussion, but
I'm sorry, I've never heard of it.
You never heard of it? Okay, yeah, check it out. It kind of overshadowed by Dark Knight Returns, but really
hold on. I'm not a comic guy. Is that a comic about the creation of the pocket watch?
So, I mean, sort of. I mean,
the history of England trying to find a way to determine the longitude. Is that
John Osterman's father was a watchmaker, and that is a very important thematic element for that character, who then gets disconnected from time itself. But in the Netflix miniseries, which I absolutely loved, the comment that Will, the grandfather, the original Hooded Justice, spoilers, sorry, makes at the end of the show about Dr. Manhattan, who's like this godlike being and is the only one like himself on Earth. And he says, considering what he could do, he could have done more. And I always thought that was really profound. And it made me like realize that like I get very annoyed by superhero comics where the superhero is afraid to do anything because of the consequences. It's like it's literally called action comics. Like, go do some action, Superman. Don't sit around hemming and hawing about whether or not your actions are going to have... All actions, including inaction, have consequences, and these are comic books. I want to see stuff happening. So that's sort of my meta thought on like my preference in reading these books. I don't want to see the character so worried about whether or not, you know, they'll change the science or change the whatever, that they don't do anything. And I think there was an era of comics where that wasn't a bigger issue. I think we're past it, but I think there was a long time where everybody was just like, oh no, is it not, you know, my name's Matt Murdock and should I even be a superhero? It's like, well, if you're not, I'm not reading this comic anymore. So
right.
Get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that has always sort of been an issue for later day Superman stuff. And like I said, part of that is just how do you keep doing a month-to-month comic if they're wildly changing the world? But I do think it would be valuable to study something like this. I think while, sure, you know, Star Trek Prime Directive kind of stuff could be in play, like what, you know, Ben, you mentioned the idea of like a Superman bomb. Like if you're able to figure out how Superman controls his inertia or whatever system we're talking about, even if it's just you figured out how to clone some of his cells and they solar batteries and then they can be released as like a solar grenade or something, like that could be catastrophic. Or maybe you could figure out a way to have cars that don't burn fossil fuels. And it would be interesting to explore that thing, but it's obviously just something they can't do in a monthly book that is expected to continue in perpetuity without major resets. Did
we talk about the last time I was on the show how I personally believe Superman's car does not have an engine, or if it does, he never turns it on, and that he has reinforced the frame with more metal and his heat vision, and he just flies the car around using his super strength and flight, so he's holding the car up by the steering column so it looks like he's driving.
You're saying he's Fred Flintstoning his car.
He's Fred Flintstoning the car,
but with flight.
But with his flight powers. But because I pointed out earlier in this episode that he has super ventriloquism, which is canonical. He does have super ventriloquism. He's also making car noises so that no one suspects him.
He's going
vroom, vroom. That is every time I see Clark in a car, that is what I believe is happening. And I'm not kidding. Like that is, I came up with that theory based on a specific episode of Superman the Animated Series, and I will never back down from it.
May I make a proposal, Ryan? The only thing that I'm incredulous about is that if somebody was in that car with him, they could tell that he wasn't speaking with his normal, you know, they could talk to him and determine that he wasn't making the vroom vroom sounds with his mouth, which just, yeah, and throat and larynx.
Well, I mean, that's why he eventually had to buy a Prius.
Or he has a crazy subwoofer that he does turn on. It's battery powered. And he just like blasts some sort of music that makes it impossible to have a conversation while you're in the car with him.
I'm just saying that Superman's got another orifice he can emit sound from.
There you go.
Actually, to go with Ryan's whole thing, Superman canonically was a big Metallica fan in the 90s. So, like, maybe he was just blasting that everywhere he went. And that's why no one wanted to drive with him. It would be like, Jesus Christ, Clark always is just blasting Metallica.
Yeah.
I wanted to segue back to the paper because I had a question that I wanted to get to, and we've gotten fairly far from the paper. So the flight, super strength, etc., those all make perfect sense to me because that is pretty close to where my head was at. And heat vision is fine, like, you know, it's its own weird thing, but it's like, okay, cool, like, well, you're basically just doing like a mirror bouncing a light at an ant kind of thing, but just like intensified by his powers. The breath power. So the way I understand it from your paper, and then the way I understand Superman's anatomy that is presupposed by your paper, are at odds, because I feel that if he is chilling the air inside of his lungs, wouldn't that potentially fuck him up? And then to breathe it out, wouldn't that be accelerating the air? And I understand that like actual compressed air can be, you know, shot off from a hose or whatnot with like incredible force, but I'm just like trying to grok like where in the process the cold part is versus where in the process the actual like propelling it out part is, and also the limits of his invulnerability. I mean, I guess if he's just so smart, he can be making him like the walls of his lungs super invulnerable at the same time that he's super chilling it.
Yeah, I think he would make like the walls of his throat, for example, super heavy to insulate them from the rest of his body from the cold. Yeah. That's what I'm imagining. So yes, that thing you said is what also I think so too.
Okay, it's just kind of wild because it's so the vision powers are weird.
Wait, this brings up something else, Case. Could Superman then breathe fire?
Yeah,
that feels like the more natural thing to do, frankly.
Well,
could he have freeze vision? Like, why did he choose to have one come out his mouth and one come out his eyeballs? Answer me that, Doctor.
Well, I don't know.
Can he fart icicles?
Let's see. Well, I mean, like, so if you're emitting a beam of heavy particles, they'll travel. If they start out moving in a straight line and they're really, really heavy, there'll be some dissipation over the course of the thing, but they'll kind of keep traveling in a straight line-ish until they get diverted. Whereas if you are exhaling the heavy particles, they're naturally not come out of your mouth focused into a beam, I think. I see no reason why Superman couldn't breathe fire, though.
Heat whistling.
Except that there might be an aspect of maybe only his eyes can do the Maxwell demon thing because he's looking at each. I mean, being able to resolve an individual particle is below the Raleigh criterion, so he'd have to have some kind of weird optics thing going on.
Is the Raleigh criterion that like fundamental resolution of the universe thing?
It's a fundamental resolution of a lens and a particular wavelength of light, and that's probably the way I'm going to get out of it. But it might be that for him to focus it into a beam, he needs to be able to use his eyes to see every individual atom as it comes in to bounce off him. Whereas if it's through his lungs, I think he's just exhaling. I don't see why he couldn't exhale super hot gas, though, except for maybe he just doesn't want to. And being able to exhale cold gas is fairly useful because you can do things like freeze yourself a little boat, and then maybe your friend Jimmy can ride in the boat made of frozen ice, or like freeze a bridge so that it's not going to crumble under its own weight somehow, because I don't know what the strength of ice is. But
here's my theory.
Yeah.
Do we think Clark figured out his heat vision or his X-ray vision first? Which do you think came first?
My guess is X-ray vision, because
I think
it's more
so too.
passive. Yeah.
Yeah, I think X-ray vision because if nothing else, assuming that both powers came on at a weaker level than they would ultimately get to, that he would notice the X-ray vision before he noticed that he was making things hot. Like, people probably wouldn't notice that it was like, oh, like that metal's a little bit warmer, but it's only by like 4 degrees warmer.
And in a lot of interpretations of the comics, I agree. So I think X-ray vision comes online first, or at least he notices that he has this ability first, and then I feel like,
wait, are you saying X-ray vision or heat vision?
I think X-ray vision first.
Okay.
He notices that like things seem translucent to him that don't seem translucent to other people, and then a lot of times they like tie in his heat vision with like anger. It's almost like he hulks out, and that's when he has heat vision a little bit. Or if you believe the whole thing that he's like absorbing solar radiation, I could see like the need for like a heat dump, heat sink, right? So he's got to like dump some excess heat. So he got the heat vision first, and maybe he like tried to do cold vision, and it didn't really work as well. And he got frustrated, and in getting frustrated, he like went like, "Arr!" and then like huffed, and then noticed that the huff was really cold. And he's like, "Oh, maybe it's better if I do this through my lungs instead of my eyeballs."
I mean, narratively, that makes sense to me.
I'm trying to tell a story here, Ben.
Yeah, like I said, narratively, it's a good story. I think all of these powers require a substantial amount of control. To the point where, he wouldn't be able to do... I mean, I can't think very well when I'm totally livid. The amount of control doing heat vision would require, like, him to be very calm so that he could, like, Maxwell demon individual particles in a line towards you,
You know what else this solves?
What?
The fundamental...
situation?
Well, maybe the bizarre situation. We can explore that, too. But I was thinking in terms of the fundamental fear that Superman could go bad on us, like, and become an evil despot or dictator, because I feel like his level of control necessary keeps him on the straight and narrow, and if he actually tried to go evil, he wouldn't have the control necessary to like use his powers to the full extent, and so he wouldn't be powerful enough to take over the world.
I mean, it certainly keeps him on the lawful axis of the lawful chaotic side, but yeah. I'm not sure about the good evil.
So you still think we could get like a Darth Vader Superman?
Yeah, exactly.
Lawful evil. I mean, I guess that's sort of what Red Sun, the Mark Millar series posits, but they don't lean into the evil as much as the totalitarianism.
Yeah, or even Zod. I mean, sort of is like, he's definitely more lawful evil than chaotic evil.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to discuss, Ben, is
Yes.
how does your theory play into, so what were the conditions on Krypton such that this ability evolved? And is because we know that Kryptonians can't do all the stuff that Clark can do on Krypton. So, I know you're a physicist, and I didn't think to talk about this from an evolutionary biology perspective when we first chatted, in 2009. But like, how did Kryptonians evolve this trait such that whenever Kryptonian arrives on Earth, suddenly they can control inertial mass, or could they on Krypton and something else was going on?
I have a hypothesis, actually, for that one.
I'm into it. I'm excited.
If I might throw this one. Okay, so, I mean, this goes back to the general issue of Krypton having, like, particularly harsh conditions for everyone living on it. Like, so much so that they bred Doomsday on there because it was such a shitty planet to be. Like, Krypton is like a giant Arrakis kind of thing. Like, it sucks to be there. And it is because I have speculated on this one where, just going off of psychic powers as opposed to, like, being quite so precise to a science scenario, where you could have one where, rather than developing a higher density and larger muscles and so forth, that it is a neurological thing, because there's entirely the possibility that Krypton itself was not their original planet. And even if it was, it could be a scenario where, as the sun grew red and like everything got worse on the planet, that they were forced to develop a way to function in spite of the negative conditions. And so, especially if they aren't originally from there, but even if they are, and just as the sun got older and potentially larger, and maybe messed up their axis and maybe bathe them in more radiation, or change the type of radiation that they're exposed to by virtue of it just getting larger and they're maybe swallowing up some of the closer planets to it, that whatever sort of mechanisms that are in play for powers outside of just like raw density, that is something that they physiologically developed, and that the circumstances of being on Earth are what allows Superman to basically be unfettered.
So, if I understand your point, and correct me if I don't, you're saying to survive, they evolved this ability just to survive on Krypton. So they're functionally...
Right, just to be a functional entity.
Right, so they function as humans, más o menos, on Krypton, but then when they come to Earth, the conditions are so prime that he's able to like unleash the full suite of what these powers could do if he wasn't just using them to like prevent himself from being crushed or killed or dead.
Right, and potentially there's a photosynthetic effect occurring with him where like
whoa, gotta stop you there, because we have had so many arguments in the history of science sort of about whether or not Superman is photosynthetic or photovoltaic, and I come down strongly on the photovoltaic side because he is not green. He is a Caucasian male presenting person. And to photosynthesize in my world, you need chlorophyll to do that, and chlorophyll is green. So
well, chlorophyll. Again, I am not science person, but I do recall. But I am a giant nerd.
I will leave this call case.
I have read that there are related pigments to chlorophyll that are red or blue, and that the settled upon one on Earth made sense based on our conditions. Because
of the spectra of light emitted by our sun, I'm familiar with that as well, and we have seen red and blue versions of Superman.
I'm sure you're more familiar.
He is not currently red or blue. That they have done away with that particular. I don't actually know if that's still even in continuity, that he was the duality electric Superman. But no, I actually like that theory about the conditions on Krypton a lot, because the Planet Hulk storyline where Bruce Banner is in the Hulk form for years because he's on this other planet as like a gladiator king. I always interpreted that as it isn't necessarily that Bruce is angry that entire time. It's that the conditions on that planet are such that if he reverted back to Bruce would die, and Hulk can't let Bruce die, so he just stays Hulk that whole time, which is why he's not quite as strong and a little bit smarter, because he's not in like full rage mode.
Yeah, yes, I would agree on that point. I'm just saying that that it is possible that there is some sort. I mean, like solar energy has always been a part of it. I typically like to going off of if it's a psychic power kind of thing, which could be translated to inertia manipulation, that there could be some sort of glucose or other other sugar or whatnot that he is generating that allows that. I mean,
if he's from space, wouldn't it be galactose, which is a real type of sugar?
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Wow! It
is actually cognate. So the word galaxy in Greek is cognate with milk. So the idea of galactose, it's literally lactose with a gal on the front of it. So It's lactose is a milk sugar, galactose is a different kind of milk sugar, and the word galaxy, is because it's the Milky Way. So like it is,
Right.
It all is actually linguistically connected. But I always like to joke that beings like Galactus use galactose instead of lactose because I'm a dad now and I think that's funny.
No, that works. And also the Milky Way is in part because of Hercules spitting up Hera's milk. So all getting back to our strongman scenario here.
There you go.
Yeah, so that was just my presentation of like regardless of, I mean, you know more than I do in terms of like photosynthetic versus photovoltaic, but like whatever kind of aspect is going on, like he might have like the powers might be innate, but Earth's conditions are both not preventing him, and this is the gravity situation, and then also fueling him. So that is consistent with his like longer term power source concept.
And this comes back to another question I think about a lot with Superman, and I'll ask it to the whole panel. We know that Clark does eat from time to time, but does Clark need to eat? So Ben, I want you to chime in, like, where's the power coming from? But I also just want to know from Jmichael and Case, like, what do you guys think is happening there? Like, could Clark abstain from eating if he wanted to? Like, does he get enough energy from other sources, or does he occasionally need to take in some nutrients to keep going?
Case, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like he said that he doesn't need to eat a couple of times already.
I think he said that, but I don't know that I believe him.
Well, there's also the question of like, does he need to eat or does he need to eat often? Because it could also be a scenario where like he just doesn't need
like
to
it's like a snake.
He just like
just
it could be
unhinges
that,
his
like,
jaw like Gaston and drinks a dozen eggs and then he's good to go.
helps him get large. That's why he's so jacked.
Everyone in town loves him.
Personally, I think that he does actually need to eat because I tend to default to thinking that like whatever processes that are going on, I don't like the idea that he just is a raw solar battery. Like there are fun versions of that. Like I love Apollo from the Authority as sort of that take, talking about like heat vision as like a heat sink kind of facet in the League of the Superman Legends of Dead Earth story, where like everyone was given one power from Superman, and like the guy who had heat vision had to like shoot off heat beams, otherwise his body would burn up. Like I get those takes, but I prefer to think of Superman as a biological entity that does require some like certain assets for his powers to work. Even if solar is the biggest one for him, like I think that it makes the most sense that, like, sure, he might not need to eat frequently. He might, and for all practical purposes, not need to eat in the human lifetime. But I think that, particularly when growing up, and particularly in terms of like if he was weakened or anything, that he would need to consume some sort of nutrient to work in tandem with any sort of radioactive elements that are also powering him.
I'll let Ben and Jmichael answer before I chime in because I've been talking too much.
Okay. Well, what I think is that Superman's power output is way too high for how long the guy spends exposing his body to the sun. So this is actually something else we've talked at length about on Science, sort of. The argument that he is interacting with solar neutrinos makes a lot of sense to me. So somehow the sun emits a type of particle that's invisible, that doesn't interact with normal matter, that passes entirely through the Earth. You barely get bumped by it.
It doesn't typically interact with normal matter.
The likelihood that it interacts with normal matter is very, 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 very low, and so.
But if it didn't interact with normal matter at all, we wouldn't be able to detect it.
No,
we are able to detect it.
That is correct. We can detect it. So somehow he was absorbing energy from these invisible particles, and so I would argue that his powers are fueled by this mechanism, these particles flowing through him from the sun, that I would hypothesize Krypton stopped making the neutrinos in the energy levels that
and that's what doomed the planet?
That's what doomed the planet. The Kryptonians
that's what doomed the people of the planet.
Their star
you're a genius.
couldn't emit these invisible particles at the right energy band enough. Superman comes to Earth. It's more like the primordial star that Krypton goes around, and then he can absorb them again. So these this is the mechanism that he uses to work his powers. But his regular human body needs regular food, and he has a different metabolic system that keeps his organic parts alive, and so he does need to eat.
Okay. I love everything you just said there, Ben, because like you've now introduced a really interesting twist on the failing of Kryptonian society when Jor-El gave them their warning, because like Jor-El's warning was always Krypton's going to be destroyed and there's nothing we can do, right? What if Jor-El's warning was more like our star isn't giving off the neutrinos it used to, Krypton is at risk of falling apart. It's giving out enough neutrinos that if all of us chipped in a little bit, and like put our hands on Krypton like once a day for like 5 minutes, like give it the inertial mass to like not fall apart, we could save the planet. And they're all like, nah, we don't believe you. That's like Krypton's mass has changed before. It'll change again. It's not a real problem. Hopefully you all can see the analogy I'm making here. And we don't have, our economy can't withstand the hit of us all chipping in 5 minutes a day. So we're not going to do it. And so like, it would be so cool if Jor-El had a method that through just everyone giving up a little and trying a little, they could have saved Krypton, and they just didn't listen to him. It would hammer in the climate change metaphor that much harder. So I think that's actually brilliant.
I think the brilliant thing about what I said is that neutrinos have a different mass eigenstate than they do flavor eigenstates. So whenever they're interacting with matter, their mass is changing. They can change their mass. And so I'm like, Superman can change the mass of things, neutrinos can change the mass of things. Not exactly the same, or they can change their own mass. It's not exactly the same, but it's thematically rhyming. That's what I think is brilliant about what I said.
You're the George Lucas of the Superman prequel we're working on.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, back up and explain eigenstate.
Okay, basically, so you know how like quantum mechanics, in quantum mechanics you can't measure the
position and velocity.
The position or the velocity at the same time?
I did know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? Like, the cop comes and asks Heisenberg how fast his car was going, and Heisenberg says, I don't know, because I know I'm exactly where I am, right? I'm in Cleveland or something, right? Isn't that the joke? I forget how the joke goes. Anyway. Yeah, so you can't know
that had some of the elements of a joke, Ben.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I can't remember the joke, but the moral of the story is in quantum mechanics, occasionally you get two different types of information in a particle that you can't measure at the same time. That measuring for one type of information scrambles the other type of information in the particle. Measuring what type of neutrino something is, so when a neutrino bumps into us, it can only be a neutrino of a very specific type. When it does that, it scrambles its mass. So you can't measure the mass of a neutrino and what kind of neutrino it is at the same time, which is totally weird. And it's one of the reasons we thought the sun was going out in the 1970s.
And what, did it?
Yeah, no, no. Not only did it not, but we were wrong. Well, I mean, so they had a neutrino experiment that was measuring the flux of these invisible particles coming out of the sun, because when heat tries to come out of the sun, it takes like a million years or like 100 million years or something, 100,000 years. I think there's 100 in it.
When heat or a photon?
When like a photon travels from the inside of the sun.
Because it's essentially like a Plinko inside a sphere, right?
Yeah.
It's Plinkoing
it's
it
like
back.
It's trying to Plinko its way out of the sun, and it just bounces around too much. But neutrinos don't interact with anything, so they get made nuclear fusion at the center of the sun, and they zip straight out of the sun. They climb their way from the core of the sun, pass all the way out into space in like a minute or something.
So you're saying all the photons that hit us daily on Earth when we're, living our lives are actually older than us.
Yeah.
But the neutrinos that are passing through us and not interacting with us at all are little tiny babies.
Yeah. One of them is like 100,000 years or a million years old or something like that. I forget the number. But the other one is like 3 minutes old.
Like literally been traveling in the heart of a star for 100,000 years to eventually give me a tan.
That's exactly right. So basically, the deal here is that in the 1970s, we started measuring these invisible particles, and we ended up with a number that was 1/3 too small. And we thought that one of the different possible reasons was that on the way out of the sun, the neutrino was changing what type of particle it was. And the other, because there are 3 possible particles, so it's like, hey, that might explain the 1/3. The other possibility was that the solar furnace was shutting down, and that solar fusion was happening at a rate way lower than needed. The sun was out of fuel. And we wouldn't know if it was out of fuel for a very long time, but we would know first through the neutrino signal.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so
I
they
didn't know
thought,
that. That's really cool.
so astronomers and neutrino physicists were very, very quiet about the possibility that the sun had already gone out, that it was already out of fuel. But then
didn't want to start a panic that Krypton was doomed.
Yeah, pretty much. But there were other possibilities. So in the succeeding years, and in the late 90s, early 2000s, they built new particle detectors that could detect all three different types of neutrinos. And sure enough, that's where the missing neutrinos were. The types of neutrinos they were got scrambled on their way from the sun, so it turned into other particles. So the sun isn't going out. It's not a problem
yet,
but it is a very interesting physics story.
Well, this is actually making me feel better, though, because then the idea that the sun would go out, but it would then be either 100,000 years or 100 million years or whatever number that...
There's some zeros in there. That's all I can
There's a bunch of zeros in there.
Yeah.
Is also oh, well, I guess we'd have a little bit of time.
Well, we don't know when it would... if it was...
assuming it wasn't already going out. And
let's imagine that it was. We wouldn't know when the going out process had started, right? It might have started... the sun... anyway... Don't worry about it. Not a problem.
Well, it's cool because it kind of works from a comic standpoint with stuff like Final Night, but also then it works with me being a giant nerd for the book the Nightland, where the sun quote unquote has gone out because of the idea of how long the sun would be alive or a active furnace was just wrong in the early 1900s, and so it presents a world where the sun has gone out and it's people huddling around the last volcanic craters trying to survive. And it's oh, well, that actually could allow for that kind of scenario.
Well, I mean, what happens when the sun goes out, imagine it had, is it doesn't have long to live on the astronomical timescales, but human civilization probably wouldn't be affected in the short term. But what actually happens over the course of a star's life is its energy flux
4
increases. Yes, okay, Superman 4.
The Quest for Peace... Superman throws all of the world's nukes in a giant net at the sun. So wouldn't that buy us some time?
No, zero time. Nuclear hydrogen fusion releases all this energy. But stars get hotter as they age. So the story where Krypton's sun was releasing particles in a different energy band over the course of its evolution is entirely feasible. Also the sun is heating up. Not fast enough to cause global warming, but on a very large time scale. I mean, the Earth's oceans will evaporate before the sun runs out of fuel.
That's so good to hear.
I mean, we're talking on a time scale that,
but also
not even.
I wasn't planning to be around for more than another billion years, so it's not going to affect me.
Well, Ben, we know all that means is that the AI network that makes up your consciousness will have launched itself into space by then. But tell me, okay, here's the story I want. Because I keep taking your science and I try to make it into a Superman story that I would want to read. What does Clark feel when the sun stops producing neutrinos?
His power stops working. It's like how he feels when he goes to a different planet in space. He's like, "Hey, Lois, how's it going?" And then she'll be like, "Oh, hey, your hair is sure fluffy today, Clark. Did you lose weight? Your cheek muscles are much less baggy than we're used to seeing." Essentially, he'd lose the capacity to use his powers slowly, but surely. And then as his whatever passes for this weird particle physics, who knows what battery.
Would there not be some neutrinos hitting Earth from other stars?
Oh, yes.
Probably not at the same intensity.
Dramatically lower. I mean, you can compare it to how much light we get from other stars.
Right.
To the neutrino flux.
So Superman's powers would go from staring directly into the sun to staring up at the night sky.
Yeah, you could picture the scene where he'd look up and be like, the sun is turning red. It's no, it's not. It's not from a wavelength that you can see. articulating it for, trying to like match it to like the more normal like Superman concepts, but like him being able to observe a change that humanity can't, but it is robbing him of his powers.
Yeah. Like So like there's this thing called the CNO cycle, which is a different fusion process that happens in hotter stars.
Carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen?
Yeah, it'll happen at a higher and higher rate over time in our sun too. It's temperature dependent, so the hotter the core gets, the faster it goes. It happens in a lot more steps than the proton-proton chain process that currently does most of the hydrogen burning. And so all of a sudden the neutrinos that I posit he eats would come much weaker. They'd suddenly be the wrong energy for him to absorb.
So he would notice it well in advance.
He would notice it. He would notice the process. I mean, the process happens on like astronomical timescales. So,
but that's also like I think it's really interesting that the idea you put forth for what controls Superman's powers also includes a mechanism by which Clark does functionally age. We all experience not being able to jump quite as high as we could, run quite as fast as we could. Like that's a human thing, and many stories. They dull Clark's powers a little bit as he gets older, but he's still like way more powerful than most of the other like even superheroes. And so I think it's really interesting that you're proposing this idea of like Clark doesn't age on human timescales, he ages on stellar timescales.
Well, Clark's powers will decay over stellar timescales, but Clark is still made of meat and has to like eat, and his body's getting free radicals and crap.
So you're saying Clark Kent is not immortal?
No,
okay.
He'll get old like everybody. Only maybe like at a different time scale because he's not human. He's like Kryptonian. So maybe their natural lifespan is 60 years instead of 70 years. Maybe he'll get old faster than us. I don't know.
Canonically, he typically doesn't. He ages at the rate of, an Amazonian god adjacent being.
Yeah, but he went through like puberty and the early stages of human development to the same rate that any other kid.
Yeah, but there's lots of organisms on Earth that age up to adulthood quickly and then functionally, coast on a plateau. Like most reptiles have what's called indeterminate growth, where they go through a juvenile to adolescent to adult stage within a couple of years. Once they reach the adult size, they don't keep their metabolism shifts and they don't keep growing at that same rate, but they will keep getting slightly larger every year, which maybe explains the Frank Quitely Superman, who is a hulking behemoth relative to normal humans. But so maybe Kryptonian growth model is more Earth or Terran reptilian than it is mammalian primate.
Well, but even looking at mammalian primate, like that, we're looking at it from our own perspective, like our concept of aging. Like if we are at our prime for a decent amount of time, like decades, like the life of many dogs.
That's all nutrition and medicine, I believe. I think the functional human lifespan of humans is like 35, 40, but
fair. But even that's way more than, like I said, like our adolescence through like what would be considered old man phase in like biblical times is still multiple dogs. But yeah, so
did I derail things enough? Or should I have?
No, I think this is perfect. I think this is like a nice, fun conversation. This is kind of what exactly I was hoping for, because like speculating on the science of superheroes is a thing that I really love, even though I don't have like the collegiate level or let alone like a grad school level ability to really go into it too much. Like I am just a nerd and I fucking love this shit. Like it's so much fun. So like it's so fun to speculate about all of these kinds of weird aspects of Superman's powers and how it sort of plays out and how it sort of matches up with things. And I do think, Ryan, to your point, like there are a lot of ideas that we discussed here that are just great hooks for a story idea. Like Superman,
that was
the
dying
most sun.
Surprising part of this conversation was the way that, in hindsight, having talked about this stuff for literally years, I'd never done it on a comics-centric podcast where I was trying to think about like what would this look like in comic form and thinking up like what's the story that comes with this idea. And I think Ben's idea is quite fruitful and is really interesting to think about. So thank you.
And one thing I did want to say that we didn't talk about earlier was that there is an aspect of there's Superman, the conscious entity, and then there's Superman, the subconscious entity. So there's a lot of discussion about his powers that are things that he may not rationally understand that he's doing. The same way that we'd like have so many things related to our center of gravity, or just breathing, like so many autonomic functions that we aren't really calculating necessarily, like what the fastest rate to drink water is, or anything to that effect. Like, how do we balance ourselves? Well, there's a lot of factors that we're not thinking about consciously. So those could kind of go into sort of like how this could all still work without Superman necessarily being this sort of like supercomputer automatically, like it's all behind the scenes stuff. Like his conscious thought could be still relatively similar to what a human thought is, albeit with super speed.
No, I think the speed has got to be a huge element of it. Ben, I got one last question for you.
Yeah, okay.
You wrote that, or you said that you were writing this paper as an in-universe person trying to explain Superman's powers as observed by living in Metropolis or whatever.
Yeah.
But you, Superman's pronouns are he, him, his.
Yes.
And you capitalize his pronouns throughout
I did.
the paper. Do you worship Superman in this?
Yes, I think
universe?
everybody kind of thinks that maybe he should be capitalizing his pronouns. Sure.
All right.
Yeah, no, that was deliberate. I thought of it as a joke, and I went through and I searched for all the pronouns and I capitalized them. Yeah.
I mean, I got to tell you, as a spec script, this would be an amazing Astro City book. Like just, switch it out for Samaritan and like make the accommodations there.
I actually don't know that it works for Samaritan. I think you'd have to come up with a new character. But
the powers would be different. Yeah, Samaritan has a, what is it, like a tachyon field that he uses for everything.
Because he's a time traveler.
Right, yeah. But you can either use that or, I mean, even Superman, but like it's a Marvel's approach. Like it is that Kurt Busiek like kind of style of like person looking up, trying to figure out this like wondrous world that is so far beyond what our natural understanding of things are.
I love it if like it's an intern at the Baxter Building and this is their summer project and it's like Century or something stupid.
Yeah, this works actually really well for Hyperion because his powers being, or at least like the Squadron Supreme normal Hyperion, because he is an Eternal, and like those powers actually map out really well to this as well. In fact, all those extra permutations they have work really well with what's going on here. So.
And Ben Tippett, Ben Tippett is canonically a character in the Marvel Universe, which I hadn't mentioned until now, but Ben Tippett is Squirrel Girl's college physics professor in the Squirrel Girl comic series.
No shit.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. He's evidently he works at NYU teaching first year physics.
Does he work at NYU or does he work at Empire State University? Because they always swap out. It's always.
Oh, I don't know.
In Marvel, it's usually ESU. It's Empire State University.
Okay.
That's where Peter Parker
maybe
went
it's maybe it's ESU.
Holy shit, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because Ben is buddies with Ryan North. Well, we're both buddies with Ryan North, which will come up here in a second when we do our plugs. But so Ryan North put Ben Tippett as in the 616 as Squirrel Girl's college professor.
Yeah, I sent Ryan. I got Squirrel Girl #1, and I was like, "This is so good." I read it in the car, and I sent Ryan an email
While
immediately
driving.
saying, "No, in a parking lot." Saying distracted driving is very serious, Ryan. Saying, "Hey, can I be Squirrel Girl's calculus or physics instructor?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure. Send the artist some things." And then I show up in a couple issues. It's pretty fun.
That is fucking incredible.
So that means we can actually do this story case because the character already exists.
Yeah. Oh my god, that works really well. And then you just I
love the idea of a prequel of Dr. Ben Tippett before he was a professor at ESU doing an internship at the Baxter Building and presenting a paper very similar to this paper that we've been talking about, but to like Reed Richards, and Reed Richards being like, "That's stupid, doesn't make any sense." But like he's right. Like Reed Richards is wrong.
It works even better for the Sentry, because if the Sentry rewrote reality so that no one remembers him, then this paper exists predating that rewrite, and people keep stumbling upon it being like, who the fuck is this guy?
But they also, like, the Sentry's whole thing was he has the power of 1,000 suns, and like this young postdoc Ben shows up and says, no, he's got the power of one sun used very efficiently, and everybody laughs him out of the room. It's great. This writes itself. We should stop recording because everyone's going to steal this idea.
This is a great idea, but that's because this paper was a great idea. So Ben, thank you for coming on. I'm so glad that Ryan suggested us connecting.
Thank you, Case and Jmike.
Yeah, this has been a great chat. Again, I just live for this kind of nerdery. So, Ben, if people wanted to find you, follow you, where can they do so? What have you got going on?
I don't have any. I'm on undetermined hiatus from my podcast. I have a podcast called the Titanium Physicist.
But they can still go
Podcast.
listen to it.
Yeah, you can listen to it. It's online. It's on anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just Google. Just search in the search bar for the Titanium Physicist podcast. And we've got 89 episodes or something like that to listen to.
Awesome.
And Ben is also a regular contributor to it's not my podcast, Ben, it's our podcast.
It's the OG. Yeah.
Science Sort of. The most recent episode of Science Sort of, I believe it will be the most recent episode by the time this episode comes out, or it might be a few episodes back even if we're more productive than I hope. But episode 345 is Ben and I interviewing the many aforementioned Ryan North, who has a new book out called How to Take Over the World, a practical guide to supervillainy, something like that. So it's Ryan North Ryan North has a science background in computational linguistics and has written a bunch of comic books. So he basically says, I'm the perfect person to write a guide on how to take over the world. So that's what his most recent book is. It's a nonfiction book on supervillainy, and it's quite good.
That's incredible. I need to check that out.
So we chatted with him, and it was super fun. And I think it actually is a kind of perfect companion episode to the episode we just recorded. So I would encourage everyone to go check that out at sciencesorter.com and available wherever you get your podcasts.
So Ryan, outside of your podcast, where can people find you and follow you?
Twitter, Instagram, those are the main places I do. I do a lot of science outreach because of my day job. I'm also a regular contributor to the iFanboy Pick of the Week podcast. I'm on there once every 4-ish or so weeks, if you're able to do the math on that. And the 850th episode of iFanboy is fast approaching. So if folks are iFanboy fans, the 50th marks of the show, 800, 850, 900, are all email shows, recorded live with video, usually with a couple of drinks. So if you want to see me get silly, I'll say, the 800 was a mess. So 850, I'm going to try to keep it together a little bit. But yeah, I'm a regular.
I think you had just become a father at that point.
Yeah, AKA I was a lightweight, and in my defense, the cocktail that did me in was made by my wife and handed to me. So I didn't make it myself. She just made me something. It had moonshine and something else in it. It was whew, yeah. So I was a little silly, but 850 is coming up, and I'm really looking forward to it because I love chatting with those guys. And yeah, I plugged this show on my most recent appearance on iFanboy. So hopefully folks went and hopefully we're getting some good cross pollination here.
Yeah, well, the iFanboy community has been awesome. We've had people just from the Discord server on just because we just love having these really positive conversations. So thank you both again for coming on. Jmike, where can people find you and follow you?
Oh gosh, the pressure. I am
yes. The inertia influenced pressure on you.
I post memes. I react to things that Case puts me in. And it's sports season, so be prepared for all the sports memes I put out the next couple of weeks.
And I didn't catch your handle when you said that, so.
Oh, at Jmike101 on Twitter.
I guess I should have said my handles then. I'm Haupt on Twitter and Ryan Haupt on Instagram. And Ben is BN Prime. The letters B, the letter N, the word Prime on Twitter because mathematically there was a previous Ben to this Ben, and so to indicate that he was a derivation of the previous Ben, he had to add a prime to his Twitter account. Is my understanding.
It's because all my humor is derivative. That's why.
Yes. I'm a dad, so I had to explain your terrible dad joke, Ben.
Thank you.
It's great. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Case and you can find me on Instagram at Quetzalcoatl5 because I am both a mythology nerd and a Legion of Superheroes nerd. You can find the show on Twitter at Men of Steel Pod. You can find more episodes of the show at certainpov.com, as well as all the other places you can get your podcast. But at certainpov.com, you can find links to other great shows like Screen Snark, which is a wonderful casual conversation about media and between a guest and then the two hosts, Rachel and Matt. Matt is our editor. So that's a great show to check out. And then you can also check out a link to our Discord server where do sneak peeks. We have a great conversations. Check it out. It's a really fun time. But also at certainpov.com, you can find this show, and you should come back for this show, because we've done 100 episodes now, baby. This is episode 102.
That's me applauding. I'm not just messing up your flow. I'm just applauding.
So check that out. We've got more stuff coming in the pipeline. But yeah, certainpov.com. Tons of great people doing great things. Check that all out. And until next time, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Folsom and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo is by Chris Batista. Episode art is by Case Aiken. And our theme is by Geoff Moon.
You should get... So what we do on Science Sort of is, I'll end the show by saying, like, come back next week for a whole lot more science, and then all the guests will say sort of. So you should try like, just experiment with, like, stay super, and then have everyone else say, man.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not...
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans!
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
She will be mine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.